Welcome, everyone. We are delighted to have everyone join us today for our 8th session of Sustainable Infrastructure, Putting Principles into Practice. We are really excited for a terrific conversation today. Before we begin, I would like to just go through a couple of the rules of the road. Emily, can I have the next slide? This seminar is hosted by these organizations. And next slide. A few rules before we begin, just so everyone is clear, this session is being recorded and your attendance is consent for being recorded. Please do mute yourself now. You will have a chance later to speak up, but otherwise, please keep yourself muted. Go ahead and rename yourself in the top 3 right buttons of your little screen with your affiliation, or if you prefer, your location. If you have any technical issues or any questions for the speakers, please do put them in the chat. We will hopefully either be able to ask your question to the speakers or answer them during the chat. And then also we have a post-session survey, which we really would appreciate if everybody could fill out at the end of before you leave. And anyone who fills it out will get an automatic certificate of attendance. In the next few days, we will be emailing everybody who registered for the event, the recording, and all of the resources that are mentioned during this session will be attached, so you don't need to worry about copying the links now. All right. So before we begin, as always, we're going to do a practice run of our polling so that we can get a sense of who is out there. So please take your iPhones or on your computer. In the chat, we have a link to the Mentimeter. And the first 2 questions are, give us 1 word to describe your profession. And the second is, where in the world are you? So as just a reminder, this is part of a year-long webinar series that is the aim is to exchange the state-of-art knowledge on how to build and plan for sustainable infrastructure. And this library has links to all the past recordings, as well as the case studies. We will soon be loading several new case studies from past events on our website. It's also meant to be participatory and interactive. So we hope that you will not only engage with us and the speakers, but also begin to engage with other individuals participating. And finally, that can be done by connecting with a community of practice through our LinkedIn site. And we will continue to do this even after the seminar ends after this spring. So the webinar series, as those of you who have participated before, follows the UN Environment Program's good practices for sustainable infrastructure. And we are now on our 9th session on fiscal sustainability and innovative finance. We're going to hear in just a moment about that, about this principle. But before we begin, I just want to say that we had a last-minute change. We are very lucky that Pablo Tybalski was able to join us from World Wildfire Fund Norway, because our original speaker for the case presentation, Jackson Kiplagat, had a last-minute, very urgent conflict. But Paulo is, we very much appreciate, Paulo has been involved in this project closely, and we'll hear about that in a moment. But because of that, there is a switch in the usual order. We are going to get our case presentation first, and it will be followed by the technical presentation afterwards with Robin Grenfell. So I think we're going to take just a moment to see the results of that Mentimeter. We've got, again, as usual, a lot of consultants and engineers, but we also have a wide variety of others who are involved in all sorts of engineering, policy advisor, foundation, finance, government, and they're coming from, let's see where everybody is located. Quite a few from the US, but we've got a good group from Sri Lanka this time, and Germany, and the UK, really all over the world. And we always have a nice group coming in from Myanmar and often Lebanon, so that's terrific. So I will now like to introduce Joe Price. Joe is from the UN Environment Program, and he is going to be giving us a little introduction to the 8th principle on fiscal sustainability and innovative finance. Joe, on to you.
Thank you, Liz, and thanks everyone for joining. So yeah, as Liz said, I'll, as always, just provide a short overview of this principle, and then we'll see what it looks like in practice with a case study presentation and then the technical presentation after that. So we're up to principle number 8, which is fiscal sustainability and innovative financing. And so there are two angles to this principle, really. On the one hand, it's about good practices in terms of fiscal policy. So considerations like debt issues, which is particularly relevant in the COVID-19 context. But on the other hand, it's about the financial instruments and the innovative financing of projects and how to channel and direct finance into sustainable infrastructure specifically. So we'll look into these two angles in the next few slides. So on the next slide, you can see the life cycle diagram. Clearly, this principle is focused on the finance stage, the finance phase of the life cycle. But like all of the other principles, it's also relevant to strategic planning and the earlier phases, as we'll see in the next few slides. So next slide, please, Emily. The principle is a bit shorter than some of the other ones, and it states quite simply that infrastructure development should be developed within frameworks of fiscal transparency, financial integrity, and debt sustainability. But as I say, it covers both policy and project considerations. So on the next slide, we'll start off then with the question of financing instruments, which is relevant to multiple stakeholders and maybe most relevant to many of you here. Sorry, there's a bit of interruption in just outside. I hope you can all hear me fine still. Apologies for that. But essentially, there are different ways to pay for and finance infrastructure with varying degrees of public and private involvement. It often depends on the type of infrastructure services being provided and on the national or political context. But increasingly, there are different innovative financing solutions and tools available for sustainable infrastructure, as countries are looking to close infrastructure gaps and find new ways of financing infrastructure. So these may involve low interest loans from multilateral development banks and also include public-private partnerships and green bonds, for example, which have both become important for mobilizing finance from a range of sources. And as Liz mentioned, we'll hear more about green bonds specifically in the case study, where we'll see what they look like in practice in Kenya. And among the private sector and institutional investors, there's an increasing demand for specific standards and labels that can assess and signal what is sustainable. So on this topic, we'll hear more about the FAST-Infra label, which is used to facilitate and attract investment into sustainable infrastructure explicitly as an asset class. But regardless of the source of finance, an impartial life cycle cost-benefit analysis should determine which projects best meet needs on the ground and are in the public interest, and whether provision of them should be public, private, or a combination of the two. Because for some public goods, private provision may not be appropriate. That's especially the case in certain countries. So on the next slide, please, whatever the financing arrangement or whichever actors are involved in infrastructure, financial transparency, integrity are critical for sustainability in the complete sense of the word of sustainability and for addressing environmental and social risks. Guarantees and other financial incentives should also be disclosed for stakeholders to fully understand the different risks that are associated with infrastructure development. And for those that are especially interested in this, we'll hear more about transparency and data sharing in the Principle 9 and 10 webinars in the next 2 months. But it's also useful to note here that responsible business expectations apply not only to companies and private sector entities, but they should also be expected from governments who are economic actors and owners of infrastructure as well. And finally then, on the last slide, I'd just like to cover briefly this angle of debt sustainability that I mentioned. This is especially important for policymakers and public planners at a national level. But obviously any infrastructure project is situated within this context, so it's important to think about the overarching frameworks for infrastructure. And in that sense, debt sustainability assessments are particularly important in the current COVID-19 context. As you obviously know, infrastructure requires large investments, and countries can spend up to 8% of their GDP on infrastructure, and further investment is expected as countries look to boost economic recovery from COVID. And sustainable infrastructure projects in particular, for example, those using new technologies, may be associated with higher upfront costs. So essentially this all means that a long-term strategic view is needed. And as part of these considerations, planners should also consider how environmental and social factors may influence public budgets in the future, and should also account for the impacts of climate change, because of course climate change hugely influences the types and amount of infrastructure that is required. For example, different investments may be required to make roads resilient to hazards and different climate scenarios. So I'll leave it there then for the introduction to Principle 8, and I will hand over to our next speaker, who is Paolo Tibaldeschi. So Paolo is a senior advisor on extractives and infrastructure at WWF Norway. He's standing in for Jackson Kiplagat, who is the WWF Kenya Conservation Director, who wasn't able to join. But Paolo's role is in Kenya's first green bond is providing tech support to the NORAD-funded Sustainable Infrastructure and Investment Program in East Africa, which started in 2015. And through this program, WWF supported Kenya's first green bond. So Paolo, really pleased to hand over to you for the next presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph. Hi, everyone. My name is Paolo Tibaldeschi, and as Joseph said, I will step in for Jackson Kiplagat. Next slide, please. So before I go into the specific of the green bond, this program, which were implemented by WWF Norway and WWF Kenya, is funded by NORAD, which is the Norwegian Corporation for Aid. The program started back in 2015 and will end in 2025, focusing mainly on infrastructure and finance. Onto the green bond, one of the things we quickly realized is that in Kenya and all throughout Africa, there is a growing demographic. In Kenya alone, there is more than 50 million people, and the UN estimates that across Africa, the population will double by 2050. Also, another important factor is that this population will be more urban than rural. So we're going to start having mega cities. And by 2100, the population is set to quadruple. So this will require a lot of infrastructure, which currently doesn't exist at the moment. In fact, African infrastructure stock it's low at the moment. Only 38% of the African population has access to electricity. The penetration rate for internet, it's only 10%, and only a quarter of African roads are paved. So this sets the situation for this bond and the need to provide infrastructure. Acorn is already present in Kenya and was a developing firm already specializing in low carbon commercial youth and student housing in Nairobi. This project was essentially to support the creation of sustainable housing for students. Next slide, please. So one of the tools that we started to explore were green bonds. And green bonds are essentially fixed instrument. The main particularity is that they are earmarked to raise money for climate and environmental projects. Green bond can also be equated to climate bonds. There are also similar bonds called blue bonds, which related to ocean work. Next, please. So it is important to remember that Kenya's first green bond was the 5th in Africa. If I remember correctly, the first one was in Morocco back in 2012. The work included a discussion, again, with several institutions, such as the Green Bond Program in Kenya, the Kenya Bankers Association, the Nairobi Security Exchange, the Climate Bond Initiative, and others. This process took about a year, and by October 2019, the first green bond was published. WWF work was on the preset of this. So starting back in 2015 and 2016, where we supported the regulatory regime trying to influence the green economy strategy and implementation plan. This already set the stage for the framework that would allow the green bond to emerge. The other aspect where WWF supported was in advocating for green finance. And again, this pushed the government of Kenya to be open to this kind of green financial tools. The green bond was issued and is to fund 8 eco-friendly housing projects. One of the main benefits of this project, besides providing beds for 7,349 people, is that it includes solar water heater, solar panel, water catchment area, and waste management. It's also important to remember that following the issuance of the green bond, the President of Kenya signed into law the Finance Act exempting green bond from taxation, which is a huge financial incentive for this type of bonds. Next, please. So in terms of the top challenges, when it comes to technical issues, probably the main was the lack of understanding of what a green bond was, and still is to a certain extent. This is why we're still talking about green bonds. In other countries, since we're working also in other African countries, there is one of the other issues is the inability to verify green projects locally. On the government side, at the time in 2019, there was certain political uncertainty, which made the process a little unsure, but hopefully eventually this happened. Again, in other countries in Africa, besides Kenya, there is often the absence of strong statewide initiative promoting green economy, and sometimes the unwillingness to offer tax incentives. In terms of the financial challenges, there was no green bond in Kenya. So this was the first, and there was a low trust in the return of these investments, and which was also due to the high financial risk. This is still a pilot phase in Kenya, so we still need to monitor the state of the green bonds and the green project and how it evolved. Last slide, please. Thank you. So in terms of the lessons learned, the green bond market has grown about 50% in the last 5 years. And it's a growing market and is expected to exceed $1 trillion by 2023. However, the OECD estimates that to meet the global climate demands, we need $6 trillion every year until 2030. This is not going to be, most likely not going to be possible. So although green bonds are, could be seen as amazing green financial tools, they might not be able to, complement the financial gap that there is for green infrastructure. It is also important to remember that in East Africa, green finance is a key topic. However, the priority does remain in strategic planning, prioritization, and project planning because of the amount of infrastructure projects that are being built at the moment. The other point is that the quality, the governance, the relevance, and attractiveness to investor of green project matters. So those projects have to be interesting and have to be viable. The other lessons that we need to remember is that the state need to promote a strong regulatory framework and issue more financial incentive for such green bonds. We as WWF, as an environmental civil society organization, we also see that the need for civil society organization to support independent monitoring of infrastructure projects, including green projects, is necessary and needs to feed eventually in the ESG rating. And finally, investor and government need to learn more about green bonds, their mechanism, and how we adopt them. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Paolo, for a very informative presentation. Let me introduce myself. My name is Savina Carluccio, and I'm the Program Director for the International Coalition for Sustainable Infrastructure, and I will be facilitating this Q&A session. But before, I've got quite a few questions for you, Paolo, so they just has generated quite a lot of interest to your presentation. But before we do that, there is another Mentimeter question for the audience where we can get some interaction. So the question that we're asking you is, in your experience, and then there's a list of statements where we would like you to choose whether you think the statement is true or false. So I'm not going to read through all of them, but examples include whether sustainability elements make a project easier to finance, or whether investors don't know how to assess sustainability, etc. So I'm not going to read through all of them because I'd like to ask Paolo a few questions. And we will review the results just after the Q&A session. So Paolo, there's quite a few questions for you, as I said. Some questions are a bit about the process of green bonds. One of your points at the end was like, we need to be more educated about green bonds, what they are, what is the process. So I don't know whether you can tell us a little bit more about the process to develop and execute a green bond, and also what would be a typical size of a green bond, and can any group initiate one? So let's start on the process side of things.
Thanks. Well, as I said, this is also one of the pilots for WWF. This is only the 5th one in Africa. So as I said, a lot of the work that WWF did put in was at the preset of the green bond. The green bond essentially took 1 year to prepare, and was the collaboration with those organizations which I mentioned. I think the biggest work it's what comes before, when it comes to supporting the regulatory regime and green finance, is to set up the enabling environment that will allow then this green bond to emerge. I think the other aspect is how viable are those projects. I'm not from the finance sector, but I would imagine that the financial institution and other institution willing to buy the bond or invest in the bond, want to minimize those risks. So those projects have to be, first of all, needed by society, and then they have to have a certain level of due diligence and governance. So those are the elements that would, in my opinion, allow for green bonds to flourish in countries like Kenya, for instance.
Thank you. And then I've got another question about the green bond market. So with the global financial and economic crisis, economic crisis at the moment, does this affect the green bond market in your view?
I don't know, sorry.
That's okay, no worries. And then that was a big question. And then another question is about the awareness and the collaboration. And you mentioned that this needs to be more sort of publicized in the use of green bonds. Are there any other examples or smaller pilots or models that you can suggest or that you know of?
Unfortunately, no, there are not that many green bonds in Africa. I can send you a list, and I know that by 2019, there were 5. So I would imagine that at the day of today, there's more. But that's a good question, and we should look into it to see which green bonds have been successful and which one haven't.
Thank you, Paolo. There's even more questions, I guess, for you, but it feels like a bit of a grilling. Maybe it's time that we look at the results, and there's more questions in the chat. If you can take the time. I know you need to leave a bit earlier, but you know, if you do have time to answer questions in the chat, please do. Otherwise, we can send them on to you later. Thank you for your presentation, Paolo. Okay, so let's look at the results now. Yeah, I mean, they're not very clear cut, are they? Some of the questions that are more clearly, people think it's true that investors look for projects that display sustainability elements, more so than they think is false, I suppose. But then also investors assume sustainability is expensive, is probably where there's most agreement. Another one that there seems to be quite a lot of the agreement that is investors don't know how to assess sustainability. People generally think this is a true statement. And then there's one that is investors don't factor sustainability into their financing decision. That's a bit of a split, true or false, you know, like there's a bit, that isn't really a clear agreement amongst the audience. And another one is investors prefer to fund conventional versus innovative sustainable infrastructure. It seems to be a small majority seems to be thinking is true. So thank you for your contribution and your thoughts on this. We will explore this, I think, a bit more when we go into the breakout. And then now time for the next presentation. It's my pleasure to introduce Robin Grenfell, who works on green transition in the Green Investment Group of Macquarie Group. And he's going to be talking to us about the FAST-Infra Sustainable Infrastructure Label Initiative. Over to you, Robin.
Thank you, Savina. It's very good to be here. Thank you for that introduction. So yes, my name's Robin. I am based in the UK. I have an environmental science background myself. I work for a financial institution, an investor in green infrastructure, and it's my team's responsibility to evaluate the green credentials, the positive environmental benefits of those investments. So just flipping to the next slide, this just is an introduction to this talk, which is around FAST-Infra, which stands for Finance to Accelerate the Sustainable Transition in Infrastructure. And I'm going to talk you through specifically focus on the Sustainable Infrastructure Label Initiative within that initiative. The next slide just gives an introduction to the number of participants that have been involved in this initiative. It's been a truly collaborative effort. The overall goal of the initiative is to develop sustainable infrastructure into a deep and liquid asset class. We recognize there is a massive, massive investment gap in sustainable infrastructure, in particular in emerging economies. So we need solutions to scale up private investment. And collaboration was absolutely key to this. We've had participation from private finance actors, from public finance to DFI, development banks, government representation, as well as involvement from civil society and sustainability experts, really bringing together the knowledge we need to understand the scale of this problem and ultimately come up with some practical solutions. The founding partners were World Bank, the Global Infrastructure Facility, HSBC, IFC, OECD, and CPI. So I've been working very closely with my colleagues from that to co-chair the SI Label Initiative. The next slide just sets out the 4 key initiatives that have been pushed from FAST-Infra, and they've been structured broadly in terms of 2 transformative initiatives. The SI label, which I'm going to talk most about today, is really about underpinned by ESG climate resilience standards, ultimately bring coherency to the market and provide a sustainable infrastructure label for assets. The second one, the FAST-Infra platform, is a technology-enabled platform, fundamentally to facilitate more rapid and concentrated flow of documentation and data through the various project phases to make it to facilitate transaction structuring. Again, I think these are both globally applicable initiatives. The second two at the bottom can be grouped together as de-risking mechanisms. So really solutions to attract private finance into emerging economies in particular, and de-risking those investments and really addressing another gap that we see. But I'm going to focus on the SI label. So if we flip to the next slide, this will just cover in a bit of detail, and these slides will be shared afterwards, so you can go through in a bit more detail. But really to talk about the why. Why do we believe there is a need for this SI label? Well, fundamentally, it's there to provide coherency to all parties involved in developing and financing sustainable infrastructure. We believe that having this transparent labeling approach will allow alignment of interest and ultimately accelerate decision making. We want investors to know precisely which investments are aligned to their overall sustainability objectives. And we also believe that having the SI label in place will encourage raising of standards in project preparation and design. So countries preparing projects can consider the SI label criteria in mind when procuring and designing projects. In terms of the requirements for the label, it is linked to an infrastructure asset, so it is not specific to a financing transaction, but it's linked to the physical infrastructure asset. It's applicable across the asset lifecycle, and the SI label itself sets out 14 criteria across 4 dimensions of sustainability: environmental, social, governance, and together resilience and adaptation. To attain the label, you must meet the baseline criteria across all 14. And you must also show a positive contribution to at least one. That pie chart on the right conveys what the baseline consists of, which was fundamentally founded on the IFC performance standards. But in considering where current good practice is, we determined that there were some gaps that needed to be filled in order to get good practice established for sustainability. And then you need to show that positive contribution to at least one. And this is a key point about this entire initiative. It has been built on existing frameworks and standards. We've not been trying to recreate something. We're trying to curate what's already there, reflecting current good practice, looking at the SDGs, the QII principles, EU taxonomy. There's also a key element is flexibility. We recognize that this needs to be global. We need to get scale, but we also recognize there's adaptability for local considerations. And so there is flexibility in terms of how you demonstrate contribution and how you demonstrate alignment with those baseline and positive contribution. Another key facet of the label is the requirement for transparency. An asset owner may self-declare, with external review being strongly recommended, but they must disclose how contribution was demonstrated and which methods were followed. So we've got that flexibility, but there's the requirement to show how you demonstrated that contribution. And that information will be hosted on a data repository for investors to access. And finally, on this slide, just to talk about the governance, we're very much inspired by the green bond principles and the structure that's around that. So we'll be replicating that to a degree. And we're currently in the late stages of appointing a secretariat and establishing that governance framework. And a key role of that secretariat will be to support the rollout of the label, so including identifying needs for capacity building and ensuring the label keeps pace with emerging sustainability good and best practice. Because this won't be set in stone. It will evolve over time to keep pace with good and best practice. So on the next slide, I'm just going to recap the benefits as we see it of this label. So fundamentally, the aim is to facilitate investment decisions and attract private finance to sustainable infrastructure. We hope that this will have the effect of raising standards by encouraging use of the label criteria in project preparation and design, and disclosure to enable transparent assessment and alignment of interest. And actually, what we hope to see is that this label, rather than being a burden and an extra reports to file, it should support reporting under various frameworks. So many different frameworks and requirements for investors to report against currently. We often hear the term alphabet soup. There's just so many different acronyms to struggle with. What we think this will help investors do is consolidate that information and be able to repackage it and facilitate reporting. So the final slide just talks about from engagement to action. So we spent about 12 to 18 months preparing the materials for the SI label. That collaboration I talked about, we went through targeted consultation, and we also went out to public consultation. And all that culminated in the announcement of the launch at COP26 in Glasgow. So at that time, we got a number of high-profile endorsements from the organizations below, which represent a significant number of investors and developers. And now we're turning our attention to action. The SI label framework and the detailed criteria are all published on the CPI website. They're available for everyone to use as of today. What we're doing now is we're developing some pilot projects, and we're going to be taking those to, again, targeted roundtables. And then once we have the secretariat in place, really promoting the use of the label. And that's when they'll really begin those capacity building exercises and promotion exercises. So we're very excited about what's next, but ultimately we're hoping that this will really pave the way for rollout and broad and mass adoption. So I think that's all I wanted to say today, but thank you for your time, and we're very interested in any of the questions that we get.
Thank you, Robin. That was terrific. We have a bunch of questions for you, but before we do that, we want to just pause again for another Mentimeter question. So if everyone can go back, the link is in the chat again. And please go ahead and answer the question of, in your own experience or people that you know working in this, this sphere, how do project developers signal the sustainability aspect of their infrastructure projects to investors? Obviously, the FAST-Infra is trying to signal sustainability, but how do you think it is happening right now? So if you could take a moment to fill that out, and then we'll come back to that after a few questions. So, Robin, let me start by asking you, there's bunch of questions in the chat. And one of them was, I think some of the folks here, for the most part, the people in this audience are not financiers or bankers, but they're people doing projects, and they seem to already be doing some different level of rating their project or certifying their green projects, such as Envision or Shure. Why is that not enough? Why do we need this new label called FAST-Infra? I know you've said that, but I'm asking you to specifically explain that, remembering that this is a non-financial audience.
Sure. Well, no, and that's absolutely the right question to be asking. I think what the exercise identified was that there was that lack of coherence, and I'll use the word coherency again. There's a lack of coherency around market participants as to what constituted sustainability. And they wanted to know, the finance community said, can we get behind a particular initiative? And there was a curation to determine what is out there and is it suitable. And it was determined that actually there were gaps in the various reporting frameworks. And this was an opportunity to establish what is currently good practice and what do financiers want to know. What do they want to know about the sustainability credentials of the assets that they're investing in? And so I think that was ultimately the culmination in it. But what I would say is that we really want to design this where it's compatible with other reporting standards. Often it's a case of just moving information from one place to another, but packaging it in the right way that's easy for investors to digest. The time is always of the essence. There's a lot of information to digest in transactions. So what we were hoping to achieve is facilitating that and actually getting it to a position where project developers can package information together in a way that chimes and actually investors can get, and they need to get it quickly. So hopefully it's absolutely compatible with these other reporting approaches, and these types of standards can be referenced as how you demonstrated contribution to the FAST-Infra label. And
so this label, the sustainable infrastructure label or the SI label is going to be voluntary. But do you see that it's these investors that are really going to be requiring it to make their decisions? Or do you see it more that the project developers are going to say, I think I can have a leg up if I go ahead and get this and will attract finance, or maybe governments are going to require it for any of their tenders? How do you see that working?
I think all three, we hope, but there's going to be a mix of push and pull. We certainly think there's going to be advantage for developers who take that first step and say, I'm planning my project with this in mind. It's something that they can refer to the endorsements that have been received from significant financial institutions to be able to say, we're doing this and this has got legitimacy. And so look at our asset, because we've been able to structure it and label it in this way. But we do hope that it comes from all of those, because there needs to be, we're looking for market signals from the investors to say, come to us with FAST-Infra, SI labeled assets, and it'll make our decision quicker. We're hoping that it does raise those standards for governments and the local governments to actually use the principles of the label, again, to raise those standards all the way through the value chain of project development. So the answer, I think the cop-out is we hope to see it all three. Which one comes first? I guess that's what we'll have to wait and see.
And do you think that this could eventually, one of the questions was, could the label be used to help a government or some regional entity actually prioritize projects?
Yes, and I think this is where the alignment of interest is particularly relevant, where the transparency of the criteria that have been met, the positive contribution, which sustainability objectives is this particular asset contributing towards. And so there you can really say, well, what are your priorities? What are your strategic priorities, either as an investor or as a government, in terms of what you want to promote? So absolutely, I think it can support that prioritization exercise.
So I'm trying to link together a couple of questions in the chat, and maybe after, if I miss some, you might be able to answer them in the chat. But if I understand your presentation, there are 4 different dimensions that you're looking at: environmental and adaptation and resilience, governance, and social. Thank you. So what happens if a project does really well on one of these and is very innovative and very attractive, but doesn't do so well on another? And is there a way of investors or governments knowing about that?
Yes, absolutely. So the absolute requirement is that the baseline criteria has to be met. The baseline requirements for all 14 criteria must be met. So when talking about an asset that doesn't perform particularly well, it may not meet the positive contribution, but it must always meet the baseline. If it doesn't, then it can't attain the label. What we hope to see is if an asset is structured, designed, and from when the evaluation is undertaken, doesn't even meet the baseline criteria, then a plan can be put in place to show how it will change and be redesigned and adapted to meet those criteria. But they need to demonstrate how that's going to be in place and actually prove that to actually get the label. So we very much use the do no significant harm type approach. Just because you did particularly well in one area, that still means you need to have due consideration for the baseline requirements across the board. And
sort of building on that, another question here is, do you see the label being able to assess and support the development of more innovative technologies in less mature markets, for example, waste management, where data is still highly theoretical?
Yes. There's absolute scope for considering innovative technologies. But again, there's still the requirement to undertake the diligence and go through it in a structured way. there's not a free pass if you're saying, well, it's new, we don't have the information. Well, to be frank, investors will need to see that information if you're going to be using that label. So there is that bar. There's not a free pass for the innovative technologies, but if taken in the same, if evaluated in the same structured way, there's absolutely opportunity to demonstrate the potential, because this doesn't need to be an operational asset. It very much can be considered from the design phase, from the pre-operational phase, to say how it's expected to perform. And there's ongoing reporting requirements, so that you need to show if anything changes, either through development or indeed show that track record of performance to back up the disclosure.
An earlier question in the chat focused on, if you recall, this principle that we're focusing on today includes financial transparency. And one of the questions early on was whether, where one would go to find out what are the best tools to be able to actually assess and implement transparency. So my question to you is there a way of using the materials and the framework that FAST-Infra has developed to really focus in on a specific component like transparency, financial transparency? Where would someone go to get the framework and also focus in on a specific indicator that they're interested in?
Sure. So what I would say is I think the link has been provided in the chat. So the Climate Policy Initiative is hosting the framework document, the detailed criteria, and the details, the dimensions and the criteria indicators include description of what it takes to meet the baseline and the positive contribution, but it also references methodologies. I mentioned about the flexibility point, meaning there are different ways of demonstrating contribution, but there's a number of useful materials and links there. And I would actually say underneath the governance dimension, we do have embedding transparency and accountability, embedding government policies for project fiscal transparency
procedures. So there are example methodologies, the IMF PPP Fiscal Risks Assessment Model, PFRAM, and other methods are actually linked there. So what I would do is encourage you to go to the framework document and the criteria table, and there's some useful links, hopefully, which you can find there.
And what do you think the impediments are for this to be widely accepted? What needs to happen, and what are the worries that this will not be a widely accepted standard?
I think, yeah, I mean, again, great question, and one which we felt was crucial to address in advance of the announcement was really getting the pull factor, meaning our investors taking, is this really needed? Is this really needed by the investment community? And I think the endorsements we got is a resounding yes. This type of information is absolutely needed. We need to promote, and we need to get this widely known. We also need to recognize where capacity building is required. And that's I mentioned the role of the Secretariat. We see that as crucially important. So getting this message widely known, getting the benefits to all actors involved in the development of and financing of sustainable infrastructure assets. Getting that message nice and clear, getting it out there, which we think we've done a great start, but we know there's an awful long way to go. That's why we're really pressing on from collaboration and preparation to action now.
Okay, last question for you, and then we're going to move to the next section. But you mentioned in the very beginning of your presentation that the end goal is to turn sustainable infrastructure into its own deep liquid asset class. Could you, for an audience, some of whom are not as financially in tune, could you tell us what that means?
Absolutely, certainly. So liquidity is essentially flow of capital. We want projects that attract capital, money. We want participants from the private sector and public sector to come together and provide finance, provide the much needed finance to make projects happen, get off the drawing board and make them delivered. So liquidity is about availability and flow of money and investment from the private and the public sector. The depth is really in response to it being diverse and there being lots of different types of sustainable infrastructure. It is, green, in terms of the green agenda, the renewable energy has obviously come on significantly in the last 10 to 20 years, but there's so much more to be done in other sectors with broader sustainability characteristics. So this is about social infrastructure. It's about, yes, providing the much needed services and provisions for communities across the globe. So the depth is really about the range of infrastructure that this applies to.
Great, and with all that institutional money around in pension funds and institutions focused on ESG investing, there's potentially a lot of money available if it can be channeled into this asset class. So the challenge here is not the lack of money. There is money available and there's willingness for by investors to get involved in even earlier and earlier stage development. The challenge is getting investable projects, which is quite often what investors talk about. And that's the full gambit about a well-structured financial case, of course, but also getting clarity on the objectives, on the sustainability characteristics, which I think, to the earlier Mentimeter question, I think more and more investors, this is becoming standard to look at, and more investors are going to look for this type of approach and infrastructure that really aligns with their sustainability objectives, and so hopefully that's an increasing trend. Okay, thank you, Robin, so much. Really appreciated this, and good luck. We're going to quickly flip back to look at the results, but before we do, I just want to remind everyone that there is a post-session survey. We're going to put the link in the chat. So if you have to leave us before the end, please do fill it out. You will get an automatic certificate of attendance. And so we would greatly appreciate that. But going back to the question we put on the board, how do project developers signal sustainability? Now, the first one was through a certification project, one of the many that Robin talked about, and some people did identify that, but more people just found that folks were just self-reporting and saying, hey, this is a green project, or through promotional materials, which may be realistic or maybe just greenwashing without any sort of the implication is that it is not in any way certified or linked to any particular standards. What the least was using replication of others, and that might be an area where if we put more case studies, put more examples out there, more folks would be able to use that as models that they could base that on. So thank you to both Paulo and Robin. We are now going to shift to the last activity in our formal session, and that is our breakout rooms. And we want to focus on one of two questions. In your group, you can spend your time focusing on one, the other, or both. Please, in the Mentimeter, both of these questions will be listed. If you have sort of ad lib comments, we would appreciate you putting them into the Mentimeter either during the session or right after as we're coming back. And then after we come back, we'll have the informal session when if there are any other questions or conversation, we'll have that for the last 15 minutes. So the two questions, as Sarah is going to break us out, in your experience, what's the biggest impediment to financing sustainable infrastructure? And then the second is, how have you demonstrated sustainability credentials to investors in the past? And if you haven't, how have you thought about doing it, or do you know others who have done it? So really your own experiences in this question of credentials or ratings. So with that, we are going to break into groups.
Wow. Thank you, everyone in my group and others in your breakout groups. What a rich conversation, rich topic. And my takeaway is that we're at the beginning of a very long journey in terms of developing financial innovation, sustainability, and transparency for our infrastructure projects. There's a lot of work to be done. And I'm going to share my screen for the last time and share some of the responses that we heard in the breakout groups to the first prompt, which is, what is the biggest impediment to financing sustainable infrastructure projects? So in our group, I know we talked about ROI, return on investment, and demonstrating that from projects for investors. This kind of anticipation that there's a higher upfront cost to a sustainable infrastructure project, but there are short-term thinking about the investment and the project horizon. But a lot of times the benefits, and I know down here somewhere our group was talking about a lot about the cost-benefit analysis and the societal and environmental benefits that often accrue potentially in the short term, but they can have a longer term horizon. And how are we accounting for those benefits in our near-term investments? If we did a better job of that, would we see more kind of selection toward those sustainable infrastructure projects and investments into those? So some more comments on the return for investment. Around governments, what's government's role here? Could governments be kind of setting guidelines, for example, around cost-benefit analyses that are taking that longer-term priorities for society and the environment? So this is a very, very rich topic and a huge hurdle. You know, as Robin mentioned, I think in the discussion, the pool of finance is there. The need is there. How do we connect projects to the finance in a sustainable outcome? And I'll go to the next and last breakout question. How have you, in your experience, demonstrated sustainability credentials to investors in the past? If you haven't, how have you thought about doing it? So rating systems like Envision, green certifications, pointing to the Sustainable Development Goals. The framework today, the SI label and FAST-Infra, shows a great approach to frame proposals. It's difficult. Completely agree with that. And I think, you know, finding ways to, as you're maybe conceiving of a project as a project implementer, how are you including that in an early stage about what credentials you're going to try and include and achieve in your project to attract investors and long-term sustainability. So thank you everyone for your participation in the breakout rooms and in the Menti poll. A couple of final words and reminders. One is Liz mentioned the post-session survey. So once you complete that, and we really do look at the feedback that you provide, because our aim is to improve upon these sessions time over time. So please fill that out and you'll get it at the end of completing that, a certificate of your completion of the session. Welcome you to join us on LinkedIn and stay afterward with us. 15 minutes, we'll be here for informal conversation. And we look forward to seeing you in March at the next webinar, which is principle number 9 on transparent, inclusive, and participatory decision-making. I feel like every time I introduce one of these principles, I just think, wow, this is the important one. They're all so important. So really the technical presentation that we'll have will be about multi-stakeholder working and civic engagement. Our speaker will be John Hawkins from COST. And our case presentation will be from the Smithsonian Institution, Ana Maria Sanchez and Jessica Deichmann. engaging stakeholders in participatory scenario planning, a case study from Madre de Dios in Peru. So we'll hope to see you again in March. Thank you all for your time and joining us. And again, you're welcome to stay with us until the half hour. We'll be here just chatting. So hope you're all well.
Great, thank you, Emily. I think it's me facilitating this part of the informal chat. So thanks for those who stayed. I must say, really engaging topic, the finance, so I'm not a finance specialist. Every time I hear someone, from finance, and I go, yes, totally, we need to do that completely. But then in my group, I had obviously Pallavi, actually, you're here still. You made a great point because I am not a financier, but I'm the implementer. I'm the representing the community coming after that financial decision is made. So I'm so keen that what you do gets connected downstream, to actually then in the implementation also needs to be done right, because that's when things get built and designed and you lock in, you translate that into something that actually does what the framework is supposed to, just push for, obviously, achieve those outcomes and then build an infrastructure that serves its purpose for a long time. Yeah, so just any thoughts on this, I guess. And then upstream, obviously, and the upstream connection is equally important, if not more important. Anyone wants to jump in?
If I may, I might add another question to that response. And it's really to do with scale of the project, because in my experience, I think that matters in a huge way. And I'm not still sure that necessarily having the smaller scale is the easiest in terms of making, ensuring compliance or ensuring a good project. But I'm curious if anybody knows of projects that were done on kind of either regional level or even municipal level or scale that, in your view, were either successful or totally failed.
Great, thank you, Pallavi. Anyone wants to come in on scale of projects or any comments on this? And maybe Robin, if you have got any pilot projects that you already identified, which ones are they? I guess that'd be interesting to know.
I've got some experience.
Great, thanks, Olga.
I've worked for the provincial government in the Netherlands, one of the provinces. And we used to have a couple of PPS projects where instead of having people maintain the road, make a new road, and we maintain it, they would maintain it for 15 years afterwards. So, and because they could get benefits out of it, like toll and such, they would completely make the road, maintain it. And we hoped they would design it in a way that it would last longer, instead of just handing it over to us and that we discover after half a year we had to replace all kinds of things and the asphalt would go bad and such. It sounds great, but you lose part of control of the assets you have. And if your policy changes, like you're getting more interested in biodiversity and using the road verges for biodiversity and wanting to get rid of invasive exotics, and that's not included in the original plan, it will cost you a lot of extra money. And to explain to people that live in your province that, well, that one road is maintained by so-and-so and that other road is maintained by someone else, and we made that 5 years later, so the policy has changed. It's not really nice, and you can't really explain properly to people why things are different. It's hard enough telling people, well, it's a provincial road you're living on, and it's not a local municipality, so things are different. But having differences within your own road network is horrible.
Great. Thank you, Olga, for sharing this. You know, I think it's a problem that we'll probably find more and more with infrastructure that's been built already. When things change, you know, like things will change, as we know. And Robin, is the SI label also for retrofit? Say, you know, if we wanted to finance a retrofit or, you know, just upgrade existing infrastructure, or is that for new projects only, or what's the?
No, yeah, it's absolutely for both. So it is for whether that's existing infrastructure that meets the criteria and you want to refinance it, or indeed wanting to change an infrastructure asset to meet the criteria with, you know, efficiency measures and so on. Well, but I think Olga had a really interesting point, which is, you know, the consistency in that changing landscape, and that's what frightens investors, the changing landscape, and looking for certainty. De-risking is something that we always talk about, not just in developing economies, but in particular in developing economies, looking for that certainty of cash flow fundamentally. But it's not just about the financing; it's also the continued need for that infrastructure asset. So a consistent arrangement, whether that be a policy landscape or a long-term agreement with the beneficiary of the infrastructure asset, for example, is crucially important.
But there's also a risk on that long-term agreement. As a government, you want to, for part, some people are afraid of it, but part want to innovate and get new things rolling. And we've only got 8 years until we've hit real big problems. So we have to change things. So if you invest in one company and to make a contract with them, like I do biomass, so you pay someone to get rid of your biomass for 10 years and make a product out of it, then you stop innovation at that moment for your organization, and the ability to, if some new technology arrives, to use that or use that in a pilot. What we did was we do a long-term contract with the people that maintain the road. We tell them they should get rid of the biomass sustainably. And because those people with the mowing machines and such don't only work for one organization, but for different, if they have a long-term contract with a manufacturer of some bio-based product, then there is a long-term supply. And it doesn't have to be by that one government organization, because if those ties are too tight and they don't look at a broader market where they can market their products and where they can get the stuff they need to make their product, that doesn't work as well. You need some flexibility, but you have to have the correct organizations working together. And as a government, you can, try to improve and fasten things. And sometimes it's better to just give a subsidy to make a fabric or provide a place for pilots along the roads, so people can try things out and do them in real life, instead of having a contract for 10 years and then you're locked in.
Thank you, Olga, for this contribution. I've got a couple of hands up. I still see Mitchell's hand. Not sure if Liz's hand is gone, but maybe Mitchell, please, could you come in?
Yes. Yeah, so my name's Hillman Mitchell, and I work with the University of New Mexico on peace engineering projects, which we look at trying to help communities build infrastructure. And my experience has been that too many times, getting kind of back to the comment about scale, people tend to start to look at the project from the perspective of what they need for that specific facility or that geography, and they don't look at other projects that may be going on that they can leverage. And it kind of gets back to a little bit about what Olga was talking about. And also it becomes somewhat myopic in saying, well, we need a road, so let's build a road. But you don't think about who the authorities are that have the responsibility for maintaining that road. And so if you encumber that project with things that, number one, you're not going to be able to execute on because you don't have the authority, and number two, you don't have an understanding about the other activities that are going on in the community. And on the other hand, we have public-private partnerships that go in and start looking at things as this is a greenfield and we're going to build everything out, and it becomes expedient to do things that, like Olga said, it's the way we've always done it, so let's just replicate that. And so taking a pause and looking at it from the perspective of how do we integrate things that can be sustained once that public entity takes over that responsibility, I think is very critical. So so anyway, it's I don't know if there's a clearinghouse that you can kind of look at and say what other projects are going on in this geography or within this vertical, and how can we bind together some of the activities so that we can get a broader impact in terms of being able to get the resources and minimize the impact in terms of societal and environmental impacts. So anyway, just a thought.
Right, thank you, Hillman. Liz, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I just quickly wanted to point to Kamiko put a really interesting comment in the text.
Oh, thanks.
About the infrastructure. When there's a crisis, there's often a push to finance and get projects going really fast and pulled right out of the pipeline. And I'm just, we're seeing it in the US right now with the infrastructure bill, where the administration wants to see some, visual impact from what they're doing. But how does the certification either, is it at odds with that, or is there a way something like the SI label could help this problem, which is just a problem almost of human nature? Robin, do you have a thought on that?
It's a great question, and again, what we hope to do is if a project has got the SI label, it means that it's gone through due consideration of the sustainability requirements. And so that due consideration is crucial to make sure that you're making the right decisions. But in terms of interdependency, again, that's another layer, which is again absolutely crucial. And frankly, again, a role that permitting authority, the organization that fundamentally oversees the beneficiaries of the infrastructure types. It is beholden upon them to join those dots, and it's something which is absolutely crucial. And perhaps if we see the next evolution of the SI label, that may bring more credence to the interdependency, and perhaps I didn't spend much time talking about the end-to-end platform, but that platform is supposed to really join those dots in terms of what the infrastructure, what the developing, what the asset, the pipeline is like, and linking those to investors. There's potentially a role to join those dots and look at the interdependencies of the assets. I have to actually drop off now. Apologies, I've got another meeting. But no, just thanks.
Thank you so much. And we all will be dropping off now, but huge thank you, Robin and Paula, who already had to get off. And we hope to see everyone next month. Thank you all.
All right, thank you.